2003 World Cup, Wallabies make it all the way through to the final, and Johnny Wilkinson does this.
Johnny Wilkinson, he's done it!
We may be going into the next golden generation of Australian rugby and the Wallabies. Hello and welcome back to the Sports Booth YouTube channel. Now I know you're probably a little bit confused. You've clicked on a video that says the golden era Wallabies rugby and an All Blacks fan sitting here talking. Now, if you don't know about our channel, there's two guys who run it, me and a guy called Hughesy. Hughesy, the biggest Wallabies fan. I am an All Blacks fan. So I thought, well, there's two ways to do this video. Either I could sit here and look at all the facts, the numbers, see what is actually happening with Australian rugby, or I could get Hughesy to sit here and waffle for half an hour about his love for Michael Hooper.
Got him!
So this is the way I'm doing it. So what I wanted to look at was the golden era of Australian rugby, what happened during that era, and compare it to now, and then look to the future where I believe we may be going to a potential golden era of Australian rugby very soon. When we think about the Australian golden era or the Wallabies golden era, we look about the 1990s to 2003. So, 13 years of dominance and as much as I say dominance, just good string of results with some really good players.
This kick will decide the fate of the Bledisloe Cup. What a player John is!
Now, a lot was happening in the landscape here during this golden era, especially from their biggest competitor, Rugby League. We had the ARL Super League split. It was the time when Australian rugby was at its strongest. You combine that with a group of players that have the name like Campese.
Campese gets it in his hands.
Phil Kearns, Tim Horan, Joe Roth, Matt Burke, Stephen Larkham and George Gregan.
Wilson! Yes! Oh, he lost the ball! No try! A tragedy!
And you've got a great mix of talent, results, a competitor lacking, and an opportunity for it to be the golden era that it was. And what came of that golden era? 2 real World Cup wins, the first ever country to win 2 World Cups, 1991.
Halliday isolated, gets past one, gets past two. England must win the ball though. And that's it! The final whistle goes. Australia said from day one they weren't coming here to run second.
And then again in 1999.
Quick one from Castanet. Penalty, but the pass goes into touch. And that is it. Andre Watson brings down the gun of the 1999 Rugby World Cup. Australia the winners, 35-12.
With those 2 World Cups, they actually won 7 out of 14 Bledisloes. Now, that may not seem like a big statement, but obviously where we look back now, it very much is. And 7 out of 14 with 5 on the trot in 98 all the way through to 2002. Again, that success breeded more success and shone a light on what was Australian rugby and the Wallabies. In that 14-year span, 1990 to 2003, they won 100 games out of 141 to sit at about a 71% winning record.
Hey, that's pretty good.
That's a very good record to have in international rugby, to be playing at the level, to be playing the teams they were playing. 2003 World Cup, Wallabies make it all the way through to the final, and Johnny Wilkinson does this.
Again Wilkinson in the place. Johnny Wilkinson, he's done it!
Now with Johnny doing that, what it actually started was a bit of a spiral. Now that's not to say that Australian rugby straight away fell off its hinges, but it began a decline that we hadn't seen before. The leading on of a disappointing kind of era with not the greatest results. And with those lack of results and I guess lack of attraction to rugby, we're seeing some of the other sports in Australia really take off. And it's definitely a different challenge to many global competitors. When you compare Australia to specifically New Zealand and the All Blacks or South Africa, those two countries don't have as many sports to compete against, especially when we look at rugby versus. When we go to some of those European countries, it's football or rugby. It's not this handful of sports that Australia have when you're competing against football, cricket, AFL, rugby league, just to name kind of the big ones there, all trying to draw you away. It's going to be tough, especially when results aren't being delivered. However, there is a way out of this. And this brings me on to my big point. We may be going into the next golden generation of Australian rugby and the Wallabies. How is this going to be the next golden generation, you're probably asking? 2025, the Australians get to face the British and Irish Lions, which is a massive tour. Every 4 years, they go to Australia, South Africa, and then New Zealand. So every 4 years, it splits. So it's a 1 in a 12-year anniversary type thing. They welcome the British and Irish Lions to their shore to do battle. In 2013, the last time the Lions toured Australia, it was estimated that the Australian Rugby Union banked £40 million.
Here comes the money.
Here we go.
So 12 years later, with, I don't want to say a disappointing Lions tour in South Africa, but one with a lack of crowds due to the COVID pandemic, this is going to be big news. It's especially going to be big news because of 2 years before a Rugby World Cup that the Australians are hosting, which is a massive win for Australian rugby. So let's take you into that next step, the 2027 Rugby World Cup. It is an absolute money generator, the Rugby World Cup. With the 2019 World Cup in Japan generating $5.6 billion in economic output. But money's not the only thing here. After the 2003 World Cup in Australia, the Australian sides in Super Rugby saw an increase of 8% in their attendance. After the 2007 World Cup in France, the French Rugby Union noticed an increase of 28% playing the sport. So this World Cup has an opportunity to make, ideally, Australia and the Australian Rugby Union some money, has the opportunity to generate interest for the domestic competition, and the opportunity to increase the growth of the game. With those four things, Australian rugby will be looking to target the next group of players to really play rugby to get an opportunity to be part of this golden generation. There's going to be many ways of how to build towards this World Cup, but the next 8 to 10 years of Australian rugby are going to be of high importance. How they come out of this 2023 Rugby World Cup and plan for those 4 years to 8 years ahead is going to be absolutely huge, and no mistake can be made. This is why I love the idea that they're looking at all their options when it comes to Super Rugby, when it comes to domestic competition, when it comes to growing the game in Australia. As an All Blacks fan, I love winning the Bledisloe Cup.
Well, duh.
But as a rugby fan, we want this game to be as competitive and as exciting as possible. Now, we're in a golden time of international rugby where legitimately anyone could beat anyone on their day. But Australia are struggling still to get over that hump of beating the All Blacks consistently. I truly believe with the attention they'll get from the British and Irish Lions and the Rugby World Cup, Australia has a massive opportunity to grow the game of rugby. Now, this can be done in many ways, but the true belief is they have to start entering the public school system before the game dies. As great as the private schools are at playing the game, they need more players, which leads to needing the public schools. However, Australia Rugby already knows this and are already looking into it. And with so many factors involved in Australian rugby coming out of their worst decade in a long, long time, I truly believe that we could be looking at the next golden generation of Australian rugby if they can get this right. I would love to hear your opinion on what you think about this Australian opportunity for a golden generation and if you think they can deliver. For now, thank you for joining me and we'll talk to you next time. This has been Luke from the Sports Booth. See ya.